Hey everyone, it's the Our Shawn. Welcome to another edition of the McBride Attorney Law Show. We have Michael Glassford joining us. He looks at life planning and really takes a different spin on the estate plan. Legal life planning is what he calls it. We're going to jump into that, what it means, how it really is a different take on thinking about estate planning, give you some ideas for thinking about yourself, your business, what your future might look like, and how you can really get intentional about planning. Those of you who know me know that I love planning, and this is another opportunity to jump into that, to think about it more broadly and really get into it. Show's dedicated to you, business owners, business leaders that are dealing with legal issues or business issues. We want to bring you the resources that we can to help you do things better. For those that haven't tuned in a while or don't know who I am, I'm the Our Shawn. I'm a corporate lawyer by training. I help people with ownership and control of their business. That's mergers, capital raise, contract negotiations, partnership agreements. I myself don't actually do estate planning, although we do look forward to what happens in the event somebody in a business isn't there, a family member or a partner isn't there. We do some planning for that, and I'll bring somebody in like Michael, depending on where people reside, and get the situation resolved and make sure that we understand exactly what things are going to look like if somebody's no longer there, somebody becomes disabled. So there'll be a lot of powerful lessons here in today's show for you. Want to remind you, we'd love your comments. Obviously, don't put anything in confidential, but drop comments about the issues you're dealing with, what you're learning from the show, what we can help you with in the future. Drop those at the McBride Attorneys Law Show on YouTube, Our Shawn McBride Law Firm on Facebook. I run a lot of these shows live there. You can also put comments on one of our LinkedIn feeds. We'd love to hear from you, what you're dealing with. Michael or I will try to respond to you. Maybe we can get you some answers, or maybe we'll come back and record another segment if you have a sufficiently detailed questions. So don't be shy. Tell us what you're learning. Tell us what we can help you with. Always remind you, we don't do legal advice and we don't do investment advice on the show. For all professional advice, consult your advisors. Our idea on this show is just to bring you general concepts, help you understand better what's going on and make spark some thinking. Then you can go talk to your attorney or your advisor for the exact strategy. So, Michael, thanks for joining me.
Thanks for having me.
See your tie there. You got the knot going. So you have a lot of different interests outside the law, and I talk a lot about being unique in business. That's my quotes. Why don't you talk about just the uniqueness of planning for folks? I mean, that's what we're going to dive into today. But talk about how you customize things and how do you make people's life plans the way they want them to be.
Okay. Well, a lot of people, one of the biggest questions I hear out there is that, I don't have enough to start considering an estate plan. Like, I'm not Thurston Howell III, for those that remember, Gilligan's Island. Mm-hmm. And I don't have that. I don't have that stuff. I'm just getting by day by day. And we got to find a way to flip the script and change that conversation. So estate planning has this like negative vibe, negative connotation around it because A, people don't think they have enough, and B, they just don't want to talk about dying. So we need to flip the script. And, I say a traditional estate planning is like, Vikings, we're planning on dying well. And that doesn't appeal to me, and that doesn't appeal to a lot of the people that I work with. So we change it to legal life planning. And what can we do in our life today, right now, to protect ourselves, be prepared for the future, but that future's in the future. What can we do today to protect our family, our business, and the things that we're working so hard to create, to not only keep them safe, but to help them expand, help them grow?
Yeah, so I mean, I think you've got two elements there, right? It's what happens in the future, but it's also can we do a foundation now to grow? What types of things do you work on with folks? I mean, what's some examples of things that you've done that kind of enable people to live better today and be more secure about their future?
So we want to sit down with a client and really get down into what's going on in their life. Are they an entrepreneur? Do they have their own business running? Most of the folks in your audience probably do. So we want to make sure, how the conversations that you have with your clients that, we're protected. We have our LLC or our incorporation set up correctly, that we have, the appropriate agreements, the buy-sells, the partnership agreements that are going to help manage expectations and help business run more smooth. But then on the family side, on the personal asset side, we're going to look at what is it that you have and what is it that we want to protect and grow. So, understand what a will is, what probate is, how those things work, and the dynamic of how the outside world gets to play in that sphere. and then how we can avoid it by having a trust, by having some probate avoiders set in place.
Yeah, and I think you kind of hit an important point, right? Is if we don't do planning, if we don't put documents in place, if we don't sit down and write it out, we kind of go into this default legal system, right? So under whatever state law applies, stuff starts moving different places, and it's not in our control.
That's one of my favorite questions. And anytime I speak, I pull the audience and I say, "Who trusts the government?" And
right.
Nobody raises their hand. Surprised, it always just shocks me that nobody raises their hand. But then I dive in and I say, "Well, who has a will? Who has a business agreement?" And not too many people have that, and so they do trust the government because the government has written those things for us. If we haven't done that, taken control back from the government, they've done that for us, and often that's really not good.
Exactly. And business-wise, what we see is a lot of times, we have partners. I do a lot of partnerships, and if they come to me too late, they didn't do the planning up front, or they put the planning off for another day, they'll show up at my office and somebody will have died or got disabled. And in the event of death, what happens? Well, it usually goes to their spouse or their children. So suddenly we have a new partnership that nobody ever intended.
Yeah, and the business is in trouble because now someone is running it or trying to run it that has no idea what's going on, and there's no relationship there. And a lot of the times when I run into that, I see that it's usually the spouse that's come in to run the business. They want to, honor the memory of their lost spouse, which is totally awesome. And they want to continue in their footsteps, but they have no idea how to do that.
Right. Well, and a lot of times the spouse, they're either busy with other projects, right? They've already had a career on their own, or they just don't know the business the way that they did. And even if the spouse is perfectly capable, and we certainly see that, they don't have the same dynamic, right? Partnerships are a very unique dynamic between the way the partners work together, and that spouse, even though they were married to the former partner, they may not have the same dynamic.
That has the potential to change the whole corporate culture of that business.
Exactly. So what do you do in a planning with your clients in those kind of situations? I mean, what do you look to, and what type of planning mechanisms would you think about?
So when we sit down and talk to a business like that, we're gonna make sure that we have those conversations. And what we talk a lot of what ifs. What would you like to see happen if this scenario,
Mm-hmm.
And not all these scenarios are ever going to play out, and hopefully none of them play out, but we're ready when they do. And we can avoid some pretty big problems by having them in place. So if I died, my spouse is entitled to the value of my share, but she shouldn't be, or he shouldn't be, entitled to the value of running the business. So let's have some kind of a buy-sell agreement in place. Let's make sure that up front we understand that, we're not going to play in that sphere. We're going to just create opportunities to change it and work back towards the original core of the group.
Yeah, and a lot of this stuff, I mean, what's interesting, and I think you found the same thing I found, these things are pretty easy to talk through on the front end. So if we have the conversation, we play the what-if games, and I do that too. I tell people, let's write a story, and sometimes I send people home with a series of essays from my office, right? It's like, write a story. If something happens to you, what happens to the business? If something happens to your partner, what happens to the business? Pretty easy to talk about up front and then write the legal documentation that carries out that story. What I find is a problem is if people wait until something happens. And then what we find is people often had different things in their mind when they kind of wrote, partner A thought they were going to go one direction, partner B and their family thought they were going to go the other direction. And you don't find out until there's a problem.
Correct. And and then that precipitates us having jobs. Otherwise, we wouldn't have jobs. But we really are interested in helping people circumnavigate that to begin with. And it's so much easier to make an agreement when we all like each other. When expectations have disappointed us, and when things are not good, or money's tight because suddenly we just don't know what's going on, and that's when problems arise. That's when arguments hit critical point, and things get really out of control.
Yeah. So some intentionality on the planning front there. So let's dive into maybe a business owner's personal life, because I always think about how business and personal life interconnect, right? So we're never just one phase or the other. So they probably have family outside the business. What type of stuff do you do with people on planning, for that phase of their world?
So we sit down, we talk about what, again, the potentials, the probate, the trust, what they look like, how they function. And typically I want to educate first and then give the client the opportunity to choose, based on what they want, what they need, and what they can afford, the plan that is right for them. But we talk a lot about something that I never even knew of till about 2 years ago. It's called a child protection plan, where we actually sit down and make sure if you have minor children in the home, or nowadays with millennials, I'm finding parents of millennials who aren't doing anything for the minor grandchildren. They can get involved, but we want to make sure that there's a plan in place, a standalone plan, separate from a will, separate from a trust, that makes sure that the children, there's a plan for the children in any eventuality, whether you're away on business, whether you're incapacitated for some reason, or whether you've actually passed away.
Right.
That there's no opportunity for CPS or whatever state variation that's called to come in and take kids and open a case.
Yeah, well, that's a big thing too. These default systems were built, often more than 100 years ago by the various states, and they kind of took into account, very traditional family models, right? Mom and dad, children. Mom and dad dies before the children. And what we're finding nowadays is the way things are happening, certainly with a lot of medical advances, children are dying before their parents sometimes because, different conditions, or grandparents are in the home. So I think that's why you're saying it's got to be very personalized. You got to really look at your situation. And, the risk of falling back on one of these default plans is it doesn't really think about the real world. It doesn't take into account all the complexity that we have in modern households.
And there still is very much a default plan with the government. It's still parents, guardians. If you're not naturally born to parents, or adoption paperwork is solidified, or guardianship work is solidified, suddenly in the middle of a crisis, you find your hands handcuffed because you can't take care of these kids. You don't have the proper authority to take them to the hospital or change their school because you don't live close to that school, or whatever the case may be. And all of a sudden, frustrations and problems are, just surmounting because you have to deal with the state all of a sudden. And that's, you have children of someone else that you're trying to take care of, but now you have to juggle this whole family support team meetings and going to court and reporting to the judge. And that's a world that you just never saw coming.
Yeah. So a little bit of proactive planning, jumping in there. I mean, you know that world because you've seen it before, right? So, I mean, the key, I think, is somebody with like your expertise. You've been through this several times. You know what the defaults are, and you know where the problems might arise.
And I've seen it from the flip side. I was a juvenile court officer for 10 years, and I saw what happens when children are taken into care and how hard it is to get them out. And usually it takes one reason to get them in, but it's like 37 reasons of perfect parenting to get them out. And so we can avoid that at all costs. I mean, the state's great when there's nothing else. Let's keep children safe, but it's just not what most people want.
Yeah. So what do some of the plans look like that you put together? What types of things do you take into account when you're building a plan, particularly for children? And where do you direct things? What is just one plan, for an example, maybe something you've done for a client, or imaginary client?
We want to make sure it has the right components.
Mm-hmm.
Most of the time, this kind of planning is done in a will, and they name a guardian.
Okay.
So they've given one legal document that says we've nominated so and so to be the guardian.
Yep.
But that's a wish. That's not a plan, because that person still has to A, accept, B, come to court and be appointed, and then figure out how they're supposed to raise your child because you didn't leave any instructions. So we sit down and make sure that there's three components to child protection planning. And first is the trigger. We want to make sure that if anything happens, whether you're away or something happens to you, that there are triggers in place that the plan comes into being. Things start happening. And the second is authority. We want to make sure not only that the legal documents are there, things like power of attorney, healthcare directive, and even nominations of guardian, but we want to make sure that the team knows that they've been assembled, knows what's expected of them, and there's some kind of a writing that says hey, this is what we want you to do, so they can fall back on that and know exactly what the parent wants and not just guess.
Sure.
And the last piece is response. They have to be able to, put the plan into action and do the things that are expected of them. And we write longer instructions, almost the instruction book that every parent wished that they would have got when their children were born.
Yep.
Writing that for the potential guardian. Hey, this is how we handle dating, driving, relationships, work, school, going to college, the things that are important to us.
Yep.
You talked about leaving the standard dynamic family. If there's a relationship that's not blood, that's important to the child, but it's not preserved in writing, what's the first thing to go?
Yeah, it's gonna fall out of the default system because they don't take those things into account, right? It wasn't built for that.
Yeah, they're never going to see that person again.
Right. And then that unfortunately does happen, right? Is a lot of times, there'll be a family that's composed of people, maybe they didn't get legally married, but they have children, or they're raising, former children from other relationships, and then suddenly, somebody dies and there's a lot of shifting. As an attorney, I don't practice in this area, but I'm on a lot of attorney listservs and attorney groups, and I see this problem come up a lot. People are scrambling. Attorneys are scrambling because their clients show up with these problems.
Yeah, and we don't know what to do, and we don't know how to fit that into the mold of the court, and we don't know how to present that as a best interest standard when we're actually talking to the judge for placement. Because they want relative placement and they want it quick. We want to get the kids to somewhere fast, but then we're going to slow it down and keep them in the system.
Yeah. That's the other piece of this, right? Is the court system. I mean, obviously they want to be efficient and they work hard to keep all the files moving, which is part of why we have these default rules and systems. And they favor, blood relatives or people that are attached to the child in some manner generally. And so every time you come in with a system you don't have written documentation or plan, you got a problem, right? So
yeah, and that's where we run into big problems. And one of the pieces of the planning, one of the legal documents that is usually left out is something that I call a confidential exclusionary document. Every family has that never ever, that person that shouldn't be in charge of their own life, let alone someone else's. And usually, in my experience, that's the person that's fighting for guardianship in court. Yeah. Because either they smell money, or they just feel like, I didn't have a relationship with my brother, so I owe it to him to take care of his kids. No, you don't. You really don't. Right. It's okay. But that's the drain on the system that we see, and we see kids' inheritance spent down to nothing as these people fight over custody. And we can just put that to bed by, here's a document, judge, this person's on my list, and this is why. When they applied to be considered guardian, the judge is going to say, hey, they already did it for me. Thanks for coming, but no thanks.
Exactly. So, a lot of advanced planning there, a lot of possibilities. So what else, Michael? What haven't I asked you today that might be helpful for somebody who's, thinking about putting together one of these legal life plans? What should they be taking into account?
Well, I think I teach a lot that folks' story is their most important asset. It's kind of like self-care. We want $1 million business, but we're not willing to invest the money to get there. We want to have, the Thor body, but we're not willing to go to the gym. Our story is the most important asset that we have, and we're not willing to do what it takes to build it, grow it, and save it for the future generations. And so when my clients are coming in, I ask, how important is your story? And, they hem and haw, and I say, okay, let's do a silly analogy. Let's say aliens come down and they're going to destroy the world, and you're our negotiator, and they're willing to listen to you, but it's going to cost you, and you have one of two choices. A, you can give away all of your earthly possessions and you save the world. Yep. Or B, you can give away your mind. You can have a mind wipe and lose your stories, your values, and your beliefs and save the world. And it's amazing. No one ever picks B.
Yeah.
And I'm like, this is how important your story is. Let's make sure that you're doing something to make it awesome and then preserve it. Because the power of story, if I suffer from clinical depression and my grandson suffers from the same depression, but he knows my story, he knows that I survived or I was a thriver and I did it anyways, that's power.
Right.
So we can make sure that we live awesome and pass that on. And that often gets, not talked about in estate planning, but it's kind of the biggest part.
Yeah. Well, Michael, I know you have a ton of resources out there. I know you're helpful to people. Why don't you show people how they can find your work, how they can find you if they want to look you up online or if they want to get in touch with you?
So my website is www.legallifeplan.com.
Yep.
I'm licensed in the state of Utah, but I'm always happy to talk to anyone, and these principles apply across the state lines.
Yep. Yeah, I know that you have specifically the license to do the work with people in Utah. So if you're in Utah, you're in luck. Michael can potentially work directly with you. If you're not, keep an eye on his broader body of work. I know he's working on a few different things, and maybe he can, if you're a lawyer, maybe he can help you kind of bring some of these principles into your document for your particular state. So check it out, folks. I want to thank you for joining us for the edition of the McBride Attorneys Law Show. Those of you in the viewing audience, pat yourself on the back. Michael, thank you for a powerful segment. I want to remind you guys, subscribe to the McBride Attorneys Law Show YouTube channel. You can then get updates. Other practitioners will be coming on here. We'll bring you live tips. Make sure you ring the bell when you do subscribe to the YouTube channel so you get notification when we put new shows out there. And you can also go to McBrideAttorneys.com and check out our blog and other ideas for business planning, growing your business, and moving your business forward. So, Michael, thanks again, folks. Looking forward to seeing you again on other editions soon.